Don't forget the money, man. All my blessings, 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 all my blessings. I need my blessings every penny, daily counting every single one. I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat.
Elliot's back to talk college football and rank our top 12 teams to make it into the playoffs and hit on a couple other fun subjects as well. Thank you for checking in, Elliot.
Thank you.
Georgia and Ohio State seem to be the consensus top two teams. I certainly came to that consensus as well. Did you find this group of teams this year hard to rank with all we have going on? The instant impact players from the transfer portal, not just trying to evaluate freshmen, which can be very hard to do. Sometimes I don't even take that into account unless they're bringing in a really big 5-star, but instant impact transfer players, the conference shifts making some schedules a lot more difficult all of a sudden and some not as difficult. We're eliminating divisions for all of the Power 4 teams. Did you find it hard to rank? And are Georgia and Ohio State like your top two teams?
I don't think it's too hard to rank. I think that Georgia and Ohio State are clearly the two that had the most returning production and talent coming in. It's been that way for a couple of years now. With Alabama, Texas, and Oregon, they're all kind of right there. And I think this sets up well for some great matchups in the Big Ten this year.
Yeah, that's for sure. And the SEC as well, I think, even though we have some weird slates where we have Alabama and Georgia missing some of the other kind of top layer teams, I think, like Texas A&M and Ole Miss. But certainly, a couple of years back, the discussion about heading towards two major conferences, all of a sudden, it kind of looks like we're headed that direction all of a sudden.
I don't think that's a bad thing necessarily.
Mm-mm.
I couldn't be more excited to have the 4 new members for the Big Ten Conference. I think those are going to be great games. Those are great traditions coming together. I think you're kind of going to see the same thing in the SEC. And I think the new big, they still calling them the Big 12, big, however many they are now.
Yeah, they need to just rename the conferences. Yes.
But I think that league is kind of up for grabs too. Like there's a couple of good teams in there, and that's probably the one that people know the least about that could be pretty interesting and fun to watch. So I think it's great for the fans. They get to see all these new things. Obviously, with college football, the tradition is what really separates it from, professional sports. But I think you can maintain those traditions and still have all the great games that people want to see.
Agreed very much. Even if, for example, Oregon State and Washington State were to join the Big Ten or whatever conference we call it, Conference A, that would help mitigate some of the travel if we created a little West Coast pocket division per se. That would be fine. The regional conference setup of half a dozen, conferences is gone now. So, and that's fine. And maybe in 30 years we go back to that. But for right now, it is what it is. And yeah, I have no problem with that. Schools can still schedule rivalry games. You can still have Miami, Florida State, Florida all playing each other, Penn State, Michigan, Ohio State. Yes, we have the alignment of conference games, but as long as you keep a few open spots, doesn't really matter where they're playing. It'll be up to those teams to schedule each other. So I don't really have any problem with it, like you said. And I think too much noise is being made about who's aligned with where. Just the road travel for the actual students from a human perspective,
Sure, and I think you might get into some cases in the future where you almost, always home field advantage is huge in college football, but maybe
Sure.
for traveling across the country, you almost have a scheduled loss like they do in the NBA kind of thing. But that doesn't mean it would keep you out of the playoff now that we're at 12 teams. So
very true. The other piece is, as far as that's concerned, transitioning a little bit into the football aspect, I think it's going to be, moving from one loss, is dangerous territory is obviously going to be 2 losses now. I don't think you're going to get a 3-loss team in except on a very big, I guess, schedule disparity, right? Someone plays a very difficult schedule, ends up with 3 losses, like if Florida, who has one of the most difficult schedules in the country this year, somehow went 9-3, and they're competing with a Big 12 team that's 10-2, and the Big 12, is not considered as much as a gauntlet. You could see like a Florida sneak in, but I think you're going to have enough choices between undefeated 1-loss, 2-loss teams that for the most part, and again, we're talking the playoffs could again expand. We could be setting the bar again in another couple of years. But for right now, I think we're looking at 2-loss teams being the line. And again, we're talking about some teams that have maybe 2 really difficult games per year coming into this season. And with the reshuffling of schedules to some extent, things get tougher for a lot of squads. So, I don't just think the teams are going to roll over in games. There seems to be this large media narrative that some teams are just going to roll over in 1 or 2 games per season because they can take more losses. And I just don't think that's true. As much as everyone seems to be saying it on every network and every talking head, I just don't think that's true. Now, we do still see guys occasionally sitting out already when like Alabama plays Furman in week 10, and certain things like that where they're either more cautious with injuries or, arguably don't play the top guys if they can help it a little bit in some of the easier games perhaps. But for the most part, you don't rest guys. And it's still going to be critical because everyone's still playing by the same rules. You still can only take so many losses. You're still kind of playing for your conference title. Like everything still matters. So I just don't think it's going to be like, yeah, we just don't care if we take a loss here. We're not going to try as hard at the end. I just do not see that at all.
Yeah, I don't see that either. And isn't part of what they're playing for is home field advantage in the playoffs?
Yeah.
Like, there's still a lot to play for. And it's always, but college football has always been this way, right? Like it's about who's the best consistent team. It's not always your high ceiling. It's about having a pretty high floor. Like it's being able to perform consistently and over the course of the season, which is now getting longer, right? It's being able to have the depth to make it through the season. So yeah, if you lose a game, right? But if you're going to be playing in more games as long as you make it into the playoffs, right? Like you got to be able to make it that far and to have the depth of the team to do it. And it's similar in the NFL, really, right? Like you put people on IR with the hope of getting them back later because that you can. It's about your consistency and having your players when you really need them. So I think they're going to be still a lot of big games, and players want to play. They're college players; they want to play. Right. They want the more tape they have, the better. I don't really see somebody wanting to be benched, and nobody that's ever played a team sports wants to be on the bench when their team is winning.
No. Yeah. So I'm just hearing, ESPN, Fox, top guys saying that, we're going to see more teams more or less roll over or, perhaps not give it their all. And what the hell are you talking about? I just hate to see, I podcast because my thought process is, kind of anyone with a good rounded, even self-education on specific topics can discuss them intelligently. And so to hear these guys say it on national television and podcasts and stuff, I'm just like, what in the hell are you talking about? I don't believe any of that. So, but they said the same thing about NIL. Oh, the rich are just going to get richer. And I'm like, I don't think so. If everyone can now legally spend money, we may see some of these schools that aren't big recruiters, but may have bigger boosters or, teams that can now pay. We may see the talent spread out. And that's what's happening. The top may still be the top, but we are seeing actual prospects spread out a little bit more. That is happening.
Well, and there's still the saturation, right, of those really top teams. Like, you're not going to get 3 5-star quarterbacks in your roster because they want to play and they want to get to the NFL. That's just not going to happen. But you could see a smaller school pick up somebody like that wasn't getting playing time that can offer a bit of cash, right, for an incentive, so they can still go have the opportunity to play and still make some money, especially opportunities and ways to get their name out there that maybe they wouldn't have had at a bigger school.
Like Boise State sniping the 5-star QB off USC's bench for this season. Yeah, that's happening.
Nebraska, obviously a big brand, but they haven't been good in a decade or more, right? And they signed Raiola right away from Georgia, so that gives that program relevancy. And can you name another big prospect that Nebraska has gotten?
No.
But you don't need to, because they have that one quarterback.
Exactly.
So you're already like, well, maybe I tune in to watch him. And
yeah. The point isn't that we're seeing, we're just not seeing 95% of the 4 and 5-star guys going to the very top schools. We're now closer to like an 80-20 split, and maybe it'll start to get better. It's not just a stockpile of the rich get richer. It's getting better now. So just some wild opinions thrown out there, I think, sometimes. But the top 25 poll came out today. Coaches poll came out a few days ago, and they're the same through the first, top 10. Michigan, Penn State, Florida State at the 8, 9, 10 spot are flipped around a little bit. We've got Georgia and Ohio State sitting there at 1, 2, followed by Oregon, Texas, Alabama in the top 5 there. Ole Miss, Notre Dame are the 6, 7, and then we kind of have some flipping around of Penn State, Michigan, and Florida State, those 3 in order in the AP top 25. Anything too crazy stand out there to you? I know Ole Miss is up there quite a ways.
Yeah, I don't know what Ole Miss has really done to deserve that, but it's preseason rankings, so you can never get too upset. I think it's interesting where Michigan ended up obviously being national champion, defending their title. I think they're the lowest to start in the preseason for any national championship winner in some time. And there are many reasons for that, I'm sure, but I think that narrative could change quickly if they beat Texas at home in week 2.
Yep.
And I think Missouri could be an interesting team to watch. Obviously, they've won a lot of games the past couple years. I still think they'll fall a little bit short this year. I don't think anything's too terribly surprising. Once you get after 10, 10 to 12, once you get through the rest of the top 25, you could pretty much throw any team in there, right? Like almost any Power 5 team, and I don't think there's a whole lot of difference until you start seeing them play some games.
Yeah. So let's start with this. Let's start with our conference winners here at the very least. So our top 4 teams that will get buys to start off with. Georgia and Ohio State, are those your conference winners for the SEC and the Big Ten, or do you have something different in there?
I think they have to be right now. I think Oregon's got a great chance to win the Big Ten, especially getting Ohio State at home. Like, that will be an incredible game, and that could decide the Big Ten. So, yeah.
Georgia, good chunk of starters returning, about 14 of them, according to Phil Steele. I'll go with his rankings a little bit more, but of course, sometimes it depends on how you count starters. Another top recruiting class, Carson Beck is back. We were discussing him just before we started the podcast here. It is sometimes hard to gauge how these quarterbacks, whether they're really productive or not, because again, he's playing with elite talent. The defense is very good. He doesn't really have to put up a lot to make it through the schedule, right? That being said, almost 4,000 yards last year, 72% completion percentage, almost 10 yards a pass. So he's putting the ball down the field. They didn't have a lot of outstanding receivers last year. It's kind of funny that Georgia and Alabama were at the top of the SEC, and neither one really had outstanding NFL talent at the wide receiver position. Of course, he had a star tight end there, Brock Bowers. 25-6 touchdown to interception ratio, and considered one of the top quarterbacks to go in next year's draft. But he'll have an opportunity this year to obviously really put something on film. Opening up against Clemson, neutral site game, Tennessee Tech, Cupcake. He'll play against his former backup quarterback, who's starting for Kentucky, and road game after that. Then they play at Alabama, followed by Auburn, Mississippi State. Then they have to play at Texas. Neutral site game for the cocktail party against Florida. Again, expected to be a talented team, but not really projected to make a bowl game. Just a very difficult schedule for the Gators. At Ole Miss, home against Tennessee, UMass late, and then a feisty Georgia Tech team that was close to beating them last year. We had them, I think Georgia Tech was up in the third quarter last year. But again, on the road against Alabama, Texas, Ole Miss, and neutral site games against Clemson and Florida. I mean, you put any other team that's not considered to be a national championship contender regardless, and this is like a brutal schedule.
It's better than their schedule last year, I'll say that.
Yeah.
Still didn't know Tennessee Tech was a team that could field a football, football team. So I really hate that the SEC does that. At least Citadel isn't on there, but I'm not sure Tennessee Tech is any better. But much better than their schedule last year.
It reduces the number of games you have to watch on Thanksgiving weekend, generally, is when that falls. That's one thing.
That's true.
For better or for worse. They did bring in the running back Trevor Etienne from Florida. Actually, I think they flip-flopped running backs. I believe their former running back transferred to Florida. I think he's going to be very good. I think he was great last year. And then they basically brought in a whole bunch. Dominic Lovett is still coming in there at wide receiver, but then they brought a new kid, Colbert Young from Miami, London Humphrey from Vanderbilt. So they basically brought in two of the top receivers from other clubs. They should be better there. The offensive line should still be good. The defensive front should still be good with NFL future prospects. I mean, the defense should be loaded. And generally, when we're looking at teams to win the national championship, you basically have to be good everywhere. Very rarely are we like, yeah, this team won the national championship, but they gave up a ton of points in the second. It just doesn't happen very often, right? So they're just a loaded squad.
Well, and Georgia, Alabama was the standard for many, many years, and I think Georgia has kind of become that. They've kind of taken that mantle, and just because they didn't win it last year doesn't mean they weren't a very good team all around. And I think, not to look ahead too far, but you really could see Georgia and Ohio State play again, as they did. Was that 2 years ago now? Is that a year ago?
Yeah.
However time works. But yeah, I mean, that's a very real possibility.
Yep. Twice 2 years ago. Twice 2 years ago? Yeah, I think that's right. Last year and 2 years ago. 3 times the past 2 years. Right? Something like that. All right. Close enough. And then Ohio State, of course, made news not long after the end of last season when they're like, oh, we're bringing all kinds of guys back. Now, they did have some problems last year. I mean, the trenches have been kind of a problem for a while. Obviously, they changed defensive coordinators, brought in the guy from Oklahoma State a couple years back. They've slowly been getting better there. The offensive line is senior heavy after struggling last year. Should be good this year, presumably making a step forward. Defensive line should now be loaded. Jack Sawyer could have gone to the NFL, but he's back. Secondary, projected to be one of the best in the country, was number 1 last year. But of course, we know every single year when we're looking at the rankings of top offenses in the Big Ten, they rank at the bottom of the entire country. So they play a few of those. So that's something to put, to make note of. They play some of the worst passing offenses.
Yeah, Ohio State is really interesting. I think as a Michigan fan, I probably pay attention to them a little bit more than most other teams. And their big problem last year was their linebackers. Mm-hmm. The reason they had such trouble stopping Michigan's run game is because their linebackers were never where they were supposed to be. And obviously they weren't the only team that had trouble with that, but they did bring in obviously some of the top talent in the transfer portal for the secondary. the D line is bringing back a lot of players, and they have depth, but you need to see those players step up in those big games, and so be interesting to see how they grow after being in that system for another year. Obviously, the offensive line, always going to be a question of how well they can run the ball, and
Right.
then again, it's another big school that we don't know what their quarterback's going to be. You brought in people, you have people, 5 stars on your bench, but what does that look like? You still need, they ran. Oh my gosh, can't even remember his name. They ran him out of town. Their last quarterback.
Yeah, to Syracuse.
And
yes.
he wasn't that bad, So you just don't know what they're going to be until they play some games. Yes, obviously the quarterback will get better over the course of the season, but how do you know how any of those players are going to react once they're playing at Oregon? So I think there's deservedly with the talent that they have to be number 2, but they still have some question marks.
Yeah, Chip Kelly in. Obviously, they lured him in from UCLA. I think he didn't enjoy his time as a head coach there. I think rumors are that he didn't like the wheeling and dealing he had to do as a coach and the smoozing, and he just wants to coach ball.
Has he ever looked happy as a head coach? I don't think so.
I'm trying to remember the Oregon days, but I think he just likes his option stuff and his speed stuff, and Will Howard's going to fit perfectly into that. Travion Henderson, we love him, even though he's banged up all the time. They bring in Quinshon Jenkins from Ole Miss. Like, he never looks super thrilled, but he might be a lot of smiles, for a bulk of the games this year. They'd be having a good old time. So they might change up their offense a little bit and be running the ball a whole lot.
Yeah, but I think the question with that is how athletic is Ohio State's offensive line? Because remember, at Oregon, those linemen could move, but they also couldn't ground and pound against a bigger defensive line.
Mm-hmm.
They had problems with that, right? So, what do they have on the roster to run that kind of thing? Because if you need, your guards to pull way out and get in front of people to run those kind of options and a lot of that lateral stuff behind the line of scrimmage, you need really athletic offensive line. And then how does that translate to being able to get a 4th and 2, right? Up the middle. So I think that'll be really interesting to see. I mean, their offense is always fun to watch, and can't wait.
Yeah, their non-conference schedule opens horrific. Akron, Western Michigan, Marshall at home. Plenty of time to figure things out there. Could be 150-0 total scores in those. And they do have to play at Michigan State, then home against Iowa. We'll get to see what the offense can do against a defense in that perspective. Then they do fly across the country and play at Oregon on October 12th. Then they're home against Nebraska after a bye week. Then they play at Penn State, home against Purdue, at Northwestern, and home against Indiana, and a nice 3-game stretch there in November before they play at home against Michigan. That is not a terrible schedule by any stretch. 4 away games, 5 home games in the Big Ten Conference.
Two
real
tough road
ones.
games.
Yeah.
And that's about it.
Yep. So, refilling some stuff with the transfer portal, bringing a lot of top guys back. Need that offensive line to gel. Need the Will Howard to pull through. He was chased out of Kansas State by a true freshman there, and we'll see what they can do. But those 2 loaded rosters, Georgia and Ohio State, certainly look like the 1 and 2. Who do you have then for the Big 12 and the ACC, which would be your 3, 4, excuse me, I guess who's your 1 and 2 on that? Do you have Georgia 1, Ohio State 2?
Yeah, Georgia 1.
Do you? Okay, I put Ohio State 1 and Georgia 2. But, yeah, either way, Georgia 1 obviously certainly makes sense. I'm kind of hoping we get something a little different, but it makes sense to have the veteran quarterback number 1 there. I'm hoping that some experienced skill players there and a nice experienced defensive front does well for Ohio State. But really, the difference right now might just be a quarterback. So it kind of makes sense to put Georgia first. I'm just hoping for something a little different, maybe. So,
Can hope.
yeah, 3-4, Big 12 and ACC. This is seeding-wise. Again, if you're power ranking top 25, it's a little different, but it's your top 4 conference winners. It's actually going to be top 5 conference winners, got the top 5 seeds. So who would be your 3-4 in the playoff?
Yeah, it's hard to say that. Utah's just been really consistent, and they have an identity, right? I would love to see Oklahoma State do something sometime. But that's more of that's probably just more of a hope. I think it's got to be Utah out of the Big 12.
Yeah, that's what I have as well. I very much would like to. Oklahoma State made the Big 12 championship game last year on the back of Kevin Ollie. Is that the first name? Ollie's the last name. Who missed a few games at the beginning of the year and then turned into the leading rusher in college football. He'll be back again. They were, 5-1 in one-score games? I have the notes here somewhere. 5-1 in one-score games, I believe.
A lot of barn burners.
Yeah. Their quarterback's not good, and he's back. They have a lot of returning starters.
Yeah, but he's got grit.
Yeah, grit. A lot of grit when you get your ass hit. A lot of experience on the offensive line, all kinds of guys. So, again, this is going to be a team that's going to ground and pound. Ollie Gordon, that's what it is. Ollie Gordon is going to be running behind an experienced offensive line through the Big 12. You got a nice nose tackle there in Justin Kirkland. Secondary was 120-something. Very bad. Presumably be a little better this year, you would hope, if progression is linear. 17 starters are back altogether. Yeah, 5-1 in one-score games last season. Their schedule, home against South Dakota State, tough. Home against Arkansas, could still be tough. At Tulsa, home against Utah, they get Utah at home. At Kansas State, who's another one of the teams at the top of the conference, projected anyways. Home against West Virginia, at BYU, at Baylor, and we don't know how well these teams are going to be. Home against Arizona State, at TCU, home Texas Tech, at Colorado. Who knows? They could be right in the mix again. I had them winning at one point when I was looking at this. But again, quarterback experience is a big thing. And Utah's going to have, what's his name, Cam Rising back again for the whatever billionth year in a row.
Yeah, he old now, right?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, Oklahoma State doesn't believe in playing defense, really. It's kind of just you can throw wherever you want on them, and that's always been true as long as I've watched them. So
they always manage to win 8 or 9 games, no matter what the roster is, pretty much, with Gundy there at head coach. That's the one caveat, is if they don't finish in the top 5 of the 14-team conference now, that would be surprising, because they still manage to be in the hunt. So yeah, Utah, Cam Rising back. Defense should be loaded again.
Here's the quiz. How old is Cam Rising?
26.
He's 25.
Okay, no.
He might be 26 by the time the season starts.
He might be.
He's not that much.
No, he might be in like year 7 of eligibility or something, I think.
Wow. You think he'd have several degrees by now?
You would think
he's
so.
A senior.
Yeah, super duper senior. Mm-hmm. Yeah, it should be a better receiving core than we typically see. They got some transfers in, nice tight end to replace the guy they lost last year, Brant Kuth, is in. Now, again, the offense was awful with a couple backups last year, 92nd. The red zone offense was also horrific, but 2 years ago when Cam Rising played, they were one of the best in the country, so presumably him back in and running things, they'll be productive again. Again, better skill position players, most of the defense back. It just sets up really nice. South Utah, Baylor at home, at Utah State, which I think is going to be an okay Mountain West squad this year, at Oklahoma State, dangerous, home against Arizona, a little dangerous, at Arizona State, home against TCU, at Houston, home against BYU, at Colorado, home against Iowa State, which could be a feisty team, and at UCF, which I think could be a very fun team to watch this year as well. But again, there's a handful of teams that could be anywhere from 4-8 to 8-4 in the Big 12.
Yeah, that's exactly what I was going to say. We just don't know what a lot of these teams are going to be, and they're probably mostly going to be in the middle, right? We don't know what Arizona's going to be this year. Turn over there, Arizona State, we don't know. TCU, Baylor, who knows? Is Colorado going to be any better this year? Do they have an offensive line? There's so many incomplete teams, I would say.
And the ACC, I have Utah as well. I don't know if I mentioned that, but ACC, who's your winner there?
Yeah, I just really don't like Clemson. That's more of a personal thing.
Yeah, I know it is. You don't like Debo.
I don't.
Dabo.
I do not like Dabo. He's not for the players, man.
He hasn't been in years past.
Such a hater about the players making money. I think it's got to be Florida State, right? How many players did they lose off that team last year, though?
They lost many. 8 starters are back. They brought in a lot of transfers, right, to help supplement that, right? Because it's no longer bring in freshmen and grow them type of deal. It's instant impact transfers. I kind of like that personally. And I think even though a lot of these kids, you can argue their focus isn't school, although some of them I do think still go to school and want college degrees, they should be able to transfer wherever they want. And in this particular case, 14 transfers with 145 combined starts, according to, I want to say Phil Steele or Athlon Sports. One of the two I was double checking. So a lot of starting experience with a number of starters coming in. They grabbed a lot of guys a handful of guys out of Florida to bring in. The defensive line, if you remember last year, really carried them through the ACC championship game. Yeah. And that'll continue. They supplemented some of those forces. The front 7 should be really good again. Secondary should be questionable, and it actually has been for the past couple of years. They're not exactly playing A-plus quarterbacks in the ACC. It's not always a big challenge there, but it looks like there's going to be questions there again. Should have some guys at the skill position, but not nearly as good as last year. And DJ Ungalele, we're going to give that a shot. Ungalele, 3rd school in 3 years. Oregon State, Clemson, Oregon State, and Florida State now, right?
Did Jordan and Travis not come back?
He went to the NFL. I believe he was unsigned. I'm going to have to see where he actually went. I'm not entirely certain.
Yeah, I was trying to see. That's surprising. I was on the Jets.
Okay. He was one of those where like, oh, he'll actually go high or he'll actually go wherever. And it's like, there aren't 20 quarterbacks that are going to get drafted in the, whatever.
Yeah.
Yeah. I don't think he was drafted at all. Injury or not injury, I'm not sure.
He was a 5th round pick. He was the 171st pick, actually.
Well, good for him.
Yeah. Way after the quarterback run in the first round. But
Yeah. Well, you get a year with Rodgers or a couple of years. Maybe if he doesn't get cut, I guess.
I was going to say.
He has to make it first.
We'll see if he makes it.
We'll see about that. But DJ U, we'll say, big body. He'll certainly be running the football a bit. He's a fine thrower. I guess I call him above average, but not. If he's contending for a Heisman, that would be shocking, right? If he's the reason this team is super successful, that would be surprising. You would expect it to be led by a dominant front 7 and a good pass rush. So if this team gets into really a crunch and he has to make big plays, I'm not super sure about that. They do get Georgia Tech on a neutral site. I'm trying to remember if they're playing one of these ACC games that's actually going to be a non-conference game because of how the schedule was set up originally, but I can't remember now. Georgia Tech, neutral site. Boston College, Memphis, and its very good passing attack. There might be points all over the place in that game. California, which is now in the ACC. Maybe that was one of those games. At SMU, which is a Big 12 team. Clemson at home. At Duke. At Miami. Home against North Carolina. At Notre Dame. Charleston Southern. and home against the Florida Gators, which might be fighting for bowl eligibility at that point.
Yeah, I honestly like they're the ACC isn't a gauntlet, but really that defense could carry them through most of that, right?
Yeah. Yep, it certainly can. So that'd be their tough games. Clemson at home, Miami on the road, Notre Dame on the road.
What is Notre Dame? I know the obviously preseason top 10, but why?
They have probably their best quarterback in Riley Leonard that they've had in a while. But again, I think he's just really good as a runner. Not sure how he's going to be as a thrower of the football, right? They lost their really good 330-pound left tackle earlier this week to injury for the season. That's going to hurt their offensive line tremendously. I think their skill guys are going to be okay, but that's typically not how they win. Tight ends passing the ball, running the ball. I think they're going to be a little bit above average on that lane. I think the defense is going to be good, and they always manage to make it in. They always manage to win 10 games, right? Because even though you see these big names on their schedule, half of them turn out to be okay teams, and half of them are not very good year to year.
Yeah, honestly, Notre Dame not being in a conference and the playoff expanding to 12 games, other than Penn State, is probably the biggest beneficiary, just because of the way that they schedule and their brand. Like, they can lose 2 games every year and probably still get in.
Yeah, so their schedule this season. So they open up with. We're loading here. I had it right in front of me. Now it's loading. So they open up at Texas A&M, August 31st. Big 7:30 ABC game. Huge game, right? That's going to be a tough one to win. That's going to be big for both teams, quite frankly. Northern Illinois at home. At Purdue. Home against Miami of Ohio. So they get 2 MAC teams in the first 4 weeks in Purdue. Then they play, so they get okay, so then they get Louisville at home. Not sure what Louisville's going to be. Home against Stanford. Not very good. Neutral site game against Georgia Tech. Neutral site game against Navy. Home against Florida State. Home against Virginia. Neutral site game against Army. And at USC, which we're not super sure about. So 3 true road games, 3 neutral site games. We got 2 MAC teams on the schedule, and 0 teams. Well, Florida State's probably the only team projected to win their conference. Currently, 3 of them are ranked. Texas A&M at 20, USC at 23, and Florida State at 10. Again, a workable schedule.
Yeah, not bad.
So,
and realistically, what do you think if they lose to Florida State and beat everybody else? They're in, right?
Yeah. Obviously, their biggest problem is that the top 5 spots of the playoffs are going to conference championships, which leaves them in that next, 7 through 12 spot. And yeah, I don't think that they can make it in with 2 losses, at least this year. I don't think the schedule's tough enough. 1 loss, specifically to one of those better teams, A&M on the road, USC on the road, Florida State at home.
Yeah.
Even that, maybe it's tough if you're looking at another 2-loss SEC team. But again, I was having trouble ranking like my top 5 or 6 SEC teams and being like, what order are these teams in? And we're talking Alabama, Texas. I kind of like Texas A&M. We're talking all these teams after Georgia.
Right.
So I'm like, if they're in a 1-loss spot with those guys, if you're power ranking teams, so after Texas A&M, USC, and Florida State, who's the next highest team? Maybe Louisville, depending on how, and they could be a 7-5 team, because after that, your choices are Georgia Tech, Navy, Army, Virginia, Stanford, Purdue, Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio. It's possible that they play like 4 bowl teams.
Yeah.
Yeah. It's quite bad. So, touching on Clemson for just a brief moment here. Again, Cade Klubnik is back. I believe he's a true sophomore now. And tough last year. Should be better this year.
I didn't watch him at all last year.
I watched him quite a bit and was underwhelmed always.
I was going to say, they were pretty bad, weren't they?
They were 8-4 last year. 2 years ago, you have to remember, they still made the ACC Conference Championship game. They won the ACC, I believe, I think they were 8-4 that year too. 8-4 last year, though. Will Shipley was one of their best players, running, catching, all of it. And Phil Maffa was a great second back as well, but he seemed to fumble all the damn time. He'll be the lead back this year, and he might be a better just power runner for them. Klubnik can run. Klubnik can do some things. I'm just not sure he's a great quarterback. This is the only team with no transfers that wasn't a service academy school, as in Army or Navy.
That's another reason I don't like Dabo.
Mm-hmm. Wide receiver core is supposed to be decent, but no names really stuck out to me. Offensive line might have some questions. Front seven should be good. It was supposed to be stacked last year, and injuries kind of disrupted what they had going on, so I'm not sure it's actually going to be better than last year, but if it's healthy, it should be consistent. Nothing sticks out to me and says it's going to be better.
I think they're going to get crushed by Georgia. Let's see what the line is on that game.
Yeah, double check that. They're playing Georgia neutral site. Then Appalachian State at home. Appalachian State's always playing good in non-conference. Then they get NC State at home, which is, again, projected to be a top 5 ACC team. Then they get Stanford at home. Then they play at Florida State, at Wake Forest, home against Virginia, home against Louisville, at Virginia Tech, which is supposed to be a sneaky team this year. They return all but one starter, I believe, and another quarterback that I liked earlier on last year before anyone else did in Kyron Drones. I was surprised he took over for Sharp. I can't remember, Darren Sharp, whatever his name was at Baylor a couple years ago when he went out hurt. And then he transferred out to Virginia Tech last year. And I was a little confused why Baylor didn't fight to keep him in. But anyways, went to Virginia Tech starting there. Then they play at Pittsburgh, the Citadel, and South Carolina at home to wrap up. So, again, winnable schedule. Their talent should be better than most of these teams. But Georgia's obviously going to be tough. At Virginia Tech, at Florida State should be tough, but they're kind of spaced out, and they get Appalachian State, NC State at home. But again, this could be a 10-2 team fairly easily. So we'll see about that.
So that line on the Clemson-Georgia game is Georgia is a 14-point favorite. And that seems nice.
Doesn't it?
Yeah.
That seems very generous. Okay.
I mean, you can't, I think Georgia's defense alone against that offense.
Yeah.
Georgia's going to be one of those defenses that's going to score 7 points a game kind of thing, right? Like, we expect them to be that good. I
don't know it's going to be as dominant as it has been the past couple of years, but it's still going to be a Georgia defense. So yeah, and I don't know. I guess we'll see. What's happening at the receiver position for Clemson, right? But yes, I think we'll be betting some Georgia numbers on that game. Yes, I think that's what we'll be doing. Touching base on NC State real quick. The defense has been good for years. The offense has been a problem. Defense should be good again. Grayson McCall, has been the Sunbelt Player of the Year 3 times over at Coastal Carolina. Shipping over here to NC State, which is starting its 4th quarterback in 3 years. He might be the best of the bunch. Hope so. So the offense might have something going. Kevin Concepcion at wide receiver might be like a surprise elite monster. They're just not scoring a whole lot of points on offense. And he grabbed a bulk of the receiving touchdowns last year. He might be really good. They've got a chunk of starters back. So just keep an eye on NC State. They might cause some damage in the ACC. My pick, I'm going to go with Miami. Mario Cristobal has been questionable at best in his first 2 years, right? He fired his staff after year 1, to make changes because they went 5-7 and kind of sucked. Then he...
and they made such a big deal about bringing all that staff together in that year one, so yeah,
and then
it was kind of a
him.
surprise.
And then he lost a game by not taking a knee last year and screwed that up. And, of course, we go all the way back to the Oregon days, and does he know how to handle quarterbacks? Justin Herbert seemed to regress later in his career under Cristobal before going to the NFL. And we're like, oh, look, he is a good quarterback. And now he's going to have his third quarterback in 3 years with transfer Cam Ward coming in from Washington State. He actually started his career way back in Incarnate Word, if you remember. Thought his offensive coordinator to Washington State a couple of years ago. A lot of hype around him. I still don't think that he's doing a lot of outstanding things, but it's possible that he's really good here at Miami. I think he's going to be in certainly his most productive spot here, talent-wise. Cristobal is still stacking a number of top recruiting classes, in addition to 17 starters coming back. 1-4 in one-score games last year. That's certainly, this is due to turnaround. No Clemson, NC State, or SMU on the regular season slate. SMU moving over to the conference and projected to be a pretty good opponent. The schedule at Florida Open, that would be a good game to gauge kind of where both teams are at, I think, although we might have to go a few more games in to see exactly how they're going to carry out the season. Florida A&M, Ball State at home then, followed by a tough game at South Florida, too. Could be a feisty team, like I said. And then a home game against a feisty Virginia Tech team as well. Then at Cal, at Louisville, home against Florida State. They get that one at home. Home against Duke, at Georgia Tech, home against Wake Forest, and at Syracuse to end the season. So again, tough games at Louisville, at Georgia Tech, at South Florida, at Florida. Tough ones there, but winnable. Home against Virginia Tech, home against Florida State.
It's that, that's 6 away, 6 home games. That's the tough part. That's not usually a recipe for success.
Certainly not. And I don't know that they'd be an at-large pick, but I think they can win the conference and make it into the playoffs.
But who doesn't like to root for the U?
The U, man, I just think that they're going to have the best quarterback, and I just think they're going to have a good defensive line. I think they got some stuff going here. Florida State is again, you never know the impact of these transfers coming in, because we do see years where teams where the transfers just aren't as productive. See LSU rebuilding the secondary last year and still sucking. And, I don't know.
Well,
I think Miami can do something here.
That could be a whole separate conversation, but I think it's a difference between filling a hole and looking for a difference maker, right? An impact player versus filling a role.
Sure.
Michigan's kind of done that, right, with bringing in like the runner-up for a trophy, like the Remington Award, right? And like plugging them in at center and saying, you're going to do that exact same thing you were doing really great here. And versus, taking somebody to learn a new system and that you want to be an impact difference maker kind of thing. So there's a difference, especially in quantity and in volume versus really quality transfers, which I impact players, which I don't think there are as many of.
Yeah, I agree.
I did want to say, though, as far as Miami goes, if they had the Tulane mascot, the Angry Wave, that would be perfect.
Wouldn't it?
Combine those two things. I love the orange, blue, turquoise, whatever their color scheme is, and match that with the Angry Wave. That'd be perfect. We should do a whole mascot podcast. Pick our favorite mascots.
I agree. If they could trade, Tulane could be the Hurricanes. That would
unfortunately
that would work.
Just as appropriate, wouldn't it?
Wouldn't it? Yeah. That's too bad. And then finally, we don't have a fifth power conference, obviously, but we do have a slot for a fifth power spot, which will be a non-power 5, giving those teams an opportunity to make the playoffs at least, even if they get crunched once they're in there. Now, I assume you don't have a MAC team. They're going to have pretty much no shot. The Sun Belt Conference has few few teams towards the top that look like good candidates, like Appalachian State. I assume that team's not going to be up there for you. And we also have, of course, the American Conference, which has some candidates. We have Conference USA, which has a big favorite in Liberty, which is returning a lot of production, was very good last year, and has an easy schedule this season. And then, of course, we also have I'm missing a conference. Help me out here.
Mid-American, Mountain West. What'd you miss?
Conference USA, MAC, Sunbelt. Maybe that's all of them. This does not include our 3 independents, Massachusetts, which will be joining the MAC next year, Connecticut, or Notre Dame. If any of them were to make it in, they can't make it higher than a 6 seed because the top 5 are going to conference champions. So you're automatically stuck at a 6 seed. So who will be your 5th conference champion, your 5 seed?
Yeah, I have no idea.
Okay.
I would like for it to be a MAC team, but...
Mountain West. That's what I was forgetting.
You forget Mountain West?
Yeah. You want me to give you a couple of my top candidates here?
If Utah State's going to be any good this year, you know?
Yeah.
Because they're usually... Yeah, I think I'm going off all past stuff because I don't know enough about these teams going into this year.
Well, Liberty returns Caden Salter, just a dual threat monster. He is phenomenal. He led the number 1 rushing offense last year, number 9 scoring defense. Of course, you have to consider quality opponent in there, but they're playing garbage this year as well. They host Jacksonville State and play at Appalachian State. They're 2 biggest opponents, and they're going to be heavy favorites there. 14 starters back. Their 116th ranked passing defense was a problem last year, but it still didn't really matter as they ran through opponents. That should presumably pick up a little bit this year, you would think. Defensive line should be pretty good still. 58th overall in defense. Much better at stopping the run, although when they get ahead, they're obviously having to stop the pass. So you can say that inflated the passing defense numbers, but at the same time, they couldn't stop much. So, but again, number 1 rushing offense, number 9 in scoring, Keldon Salter, great team there. Good in the trenches, both sides. Good enough. Better than the opponents will be. Favorite for Conference USA for sure. The Mountain West is going to be a bit of a toss-up again, but Boise State's kind of looking like the favorite. They landed Malachi Nelson, the backup from USC last year, former 5-star. Most of the guys on both sides of the ball are back, the top contributors, 17 starters, 11 of them back on defense, all of them, or 10 or 11 back on defense. Their running back last year was the Mountain West Player of the Year, Ashton Genty. Defense was better towards the second half of the year. They've had a couple weird seasons, quite frankly. So the past 2 years, they've had 1 double-digit win season, and if you're removing the 2020 season and basically look at the 06 to 19, they had a 19-year season where they also only had 2 years where they didn't win double-digit games. So for some reason, the past few years have been really weird. Like, post-COVID has been really weird for them. They're still making conference championship games. They've been to 6 of the past 7. They lost it last year. But they're still looking like a really good squad. Or did they win it last year?
Watch too.
Didn't UNLV make it last year? I could be off on this. That's okay.
Did you see that ESPN had Liberty as having the easiest schedule?
I didn't, but I've looked at a few different metrics, and even at a glance, it's pretty garbage. But they had it as the easiest.
Easiest overall non-Power 4 schedule.
Yeah. Well, that makes sense.
There are no non-conference games against Power 4 opponents, and the 2 toughest games, Western Kentucky and Jacksonville State, are both at home.
So they got Western Kentucky in there. Yeah, Western Kentucky has a new quarterback in there too, I believe. A big transfer as well. But yeah, I mean, they're my pick. My top 25 roughly right now which I'll probably cover at a future point, but I have them like 24th at the moment, but 5th in the playoffs, right? My 5 seed. I have Liberty.
Did you mention that they opened the season against Campbell Fighting Camels?
I did not mention that yet. Nope, I hadn't quite got to the schedule
that is
yet.
amazing.
Do you have the schedule in front of you?
I do.
All right, read that off for us.
All right, so they open at home versus Campbell, I've never heard of.
Mm-hmm.
Fighting Camels, great mascot. They're at New Mexico State. Then they're at home against UTEP and East Carolina. And then they go on the road to Appalachian State. Home versus FIU. On the road again at
Fighting Pitbulls.
Is it Kennesaw State?
Oh yeah, just moved up to the top division this year. Close enough.
Home versus Jacksonville State. At Middle Tennessee. At Mass. Home versus Western Kentucky, and then they end the year at Sam Houston. So, not a gauntlet.
See, the thing is, they win all the games, and they win the conference championship. They go 13-0, and they're in the playoffs. Let's say they jump a Mountain West team. We'll get to that in a second. Then it doesn't really matter where that in the top 25 at that point. But let's say they're somewhere in the top 25. But they lose a game, and they might be like the number 39th team in the country. Like, you just can't lose to any of those teams.
No.
Now, Boise State has an unfortunate schedule here. Now, you have Washington State and Oregon State, which are playing like 7 games each against the Mountain West. So, Boise State plays at Georgia Southern, which can be a feisty team. They play at Oregon. That's tough, but they can still win the conference championship, right? Home against Portland State. Home against Washington State. Doesn't count as a conference game. Home against Utah State. At Hawaii. At UNLV, who should be pretty good again. Home against San Diego State. Home against Nevada. At San Jose State. At Wyoming. Home against Oregon State. That's a fine schedule. They can win the Mountain West. Air Force should be good again. Fresno should be really good again. Fresno State. Colorado State should be pretty good. And there were some changes in San Jose State, obviously. Coaching staff, UNLV, quarterback transferred, had some things go on. So I'm not sure about how some of these other teams are really going to turn out. Not that they won't be good, but if they'll be good enough to compete. Fresno State plays at Michigan in the opener. So they've got their own non-conference thing there. And then they end the season at UCLA. Now, they could still win the conference championship. Again, Fresno State and Boise State don't play each other in the regular season. So they're going to look however they look in the regular season. And if they happen to match up for the conference championship, it could be a coin flip to who wins it. But, I don't think anyone from the MAC's going to make it. I don't think anyone from Sunbelt's going to make it. And the American, some of your top teams are Memphis, who has no defense and might have a top 10 offense again. The top 15 offense last year. Great receivers, quarterbacks back. Tulane, who has more difficult schedule and is rebuilding with new coaches, new players, new quarterback, all kinds of stuff. Like, American's going to be tricky, and they had a whole bunch of shifting of that conference with teams moving in and out. So I'm not sure that we're going to have a strong candidate from that conference.
Yeah.
So it just looks like the Mountain West is going to be one of the best options, quite frankly, especially last year when like half a dozen teams were in the mix for a conference championship. So, but quite frankly, if we have a 2-loss MAC West winning Boise State or an undefeated 13-0 Liberty, I think Liberty's going to make it in. Which is great for them.
Yeah. The undefeated team get in and,
lose by 5 touchdowns.
Florida State would be real mad at me for saying that, but
but that's probably what it's going to be. So yeah, that's what I have. I have Ohio State 1, Georgia 2, Utah 3, Miami 4, and Liberty 5. And you have Georgia 1, Ohio State 2. Do you have Utah 3, Florida State 4?
Yep.
And then take your pick 5.
I mean, Liberty does have the easy schedule, so I guess I can agree with you there.
Okay.
Why
So
not
the
the
rest
Toledo Rockets? I wish I could pick somebody from the MAC. I love the MAC attack.
Yeah, that'd be great. Just not tough enough schedule, and against each other even. So even if a MAC team managed to, I don't know what the non-conference looks like, but
they don't play anybody good in non-conference. Well, when they do,
if they
it's
beat
like
a
Ohio
Michigan
State.
team or Ohio State, yeah. So I don't know. All right, so before we get to your 6 through, well, let's do your 6 through 12. 6 through 12 then, and I'll jump in if I. Or do you want me to do my 6 through 12 and you can jump in? And then we'll match that against the AP.
You go ahead and do yours.
Okay. So that would make my number 6, Texas. I have them technically power ranked at the number 3. That'd be the 6th seed in the playoffs. Surprising to nobody, I don't think. And they are currently just below Oregon in the AP Top 25 and Coaches Poll. I would assume they're on your list, so let's do that. Are they on your list as well?
Yeah.
Mm-hmm. Okay. And I have Oregon next. That would be the, what are we on, 7? I didn't organize this right. I have them ranked as a top 25.
Yeah, actually, I had those flipped, so.
Okay, so you had it lined up with like what the AP turned out to be. Okay, so let's
Yes.
tackle those real quick. Obviously, Quinn Ewers back for Texas. They're reloading some of the skill position players. They lost some receiving talent. Obviously, Xavier Tillman.
Yep.
Worthy went on to the NFL, and they're just reloading that talent, but there shouldn't be a problem there. We don't expect to see Manning again, but has a strong commitment to that school. Seems to want to be there, which is great to see, or presumably be able to step into a starting position next year. We should see him in some backup duty, I would think, this year again. Texas 6th in recruiting, 7th in the portal rankings this past year. Portal rankings, again, from purely my observations, for the teams that really tackle it, they still rank them 1 to like 135 or however many teams there are now, but only like the top 20 really seem to matter, as far as I can see. So 7's great, but only like the top 20 spots seem to really be bringing in high caliber, meaningful players. Not that one impact player can't come in further down for somebody, but I'm just saying, if you're ranked as a top 40 transfer portal team and you're 39th, it doesn't really seem to matter sometimes. So they did lose CJ Baxter, top running back for the year, one of the major injuries, along with that offensive lineman for Notre Dame. Jaden Blue is still quite good, but Baxter's going to hurt. They did reload that wide receiver core with Isaiah Bond from Alabama, who's one of the top targets last year for the Tide. Matthew Golden from Houston, Silas Bolden from Oregon State, who's quite good. So just a new set of targets of various abilities there. Offensive line should be dominant. So, that kind of like a plus value for your running back there, I tend to think, should help Ewers out when he's making those mistakes. Because he does mistakes. I just think he does some dumb stuff sometimes. Poor decisions. Let's try and make a pass here. Let's try and make a play rather than throw it away. Let's try and... I think he's still a high ceiling guy, but I just feel like his floor is a little bit lower in some guys. I don't know what the deal is. So, lots of transfers on defense. The ACC Defensive Player of the Year, Trey Moore from UTSA on the defensive line. Safety from Clemson, Andrew Makuba. And another name I can't say from Arizona on the defensive line. Great linebacker in Anthony Hill. Now, the pass defense was a huge problem last year. It was really bad. 3 starters gone. Again, that could be what prevents them from winning a national championship. Changes were made in the offseason to try and take care of that. But will it, move into leaps and bounds we'll see. Schedule: home against Colorado State, at Michigan, home against UTSA, home against Louisiana Monroe. Michigan's obviously the big one in there. That's big for both teams. Colorado State, UTSA. The Roadrunners lost Frank Harris, their star quarterback this year, but are still supposed to have a pretty good squad out there. They continue their home stretch after that towards the back end of September, home against Mississippi State. They do play the Red River rivalry against Oklahoma on October 12th, then play at home against Georgia. Get the Bulldogs at home. And then the back end of the schedule, at Vandy, home against Florida, at Arkansas, home against Kentucky. Should be a nice stretch there. Then they play at Texas A&M. Rivalry hasn't been played in a very long time. I personally am high on Texas A&M. Get to them in a few minutes. Very doable schedule, but not without its problems, certainly. Oregon, on the other hand.
I do.
Go ahead.
I like Texas. I think that, they definitely have the talent, and they've had the talent before. I think they proved, hopefully, a little something last year, and I think you're right. The secondary is going to be that big difference, and, you can't, teams don't win championships with over 100 ranked unit on defense. That just doesn't happen. So, and history would tell you that that's not something you fix in an off season. So how much better do they get? And then is the rest of the team and the different parts of the units, good enough to carry the rest of the team?
Yeah.
I don't think they're going to win a national championship this year, but, could they win a game in the playoff? Yeah, absolutely.
Oregon pulls in Dylan Gabriel from Oklahoma. He's chased out by Jackson Arnold, who looks like a promising prospect there. So he heads over to Oregon. Looks to man this defense after the loss of, what was his name? The other kid who's playing for Denver. The other multi-transfer kid. So Dylan Gabriel's over here now for Oregon. Lost a couple of stars, obviously, but they bring in Evan Stewart, a top 5-star from Texas A&M. Offensive line should be good and athletic. Running back Jordan James, 11 touchdowns last year. Defensive line will require some growth. Big portal class brought in to bolster the defensive backs, 51st last year in the pass defense, but not Texas bad. Should be a strong unit. Nope. Home against Idaho, home against Boise State, at Oregon State, at UCLA, home against Michigan State, home against Ohio State, at Purdue, home against Illinois, at Michigan, home against Maryland, at Wisconsin, home against Washington. Again, some of the trips aren't as bad because they will stay home again. Home against Idaho, home against Boise State, at Oregon State, at UCLA. That's on one side of the country. And then they'll host Michigan State and Ohio State. Sorry, I got my map out here. And then they will head across the country to Purdue for October 18th before heading back across the country for Illinois the following week, and then going back across the country for, Michigan, and then heading back across the country to host Maryland, then back across the country for Wisconsin. No bye weeks in there that I see. So back into that schedule, workable, but road games to Michigan, Wisconsin, travel in between there.
That's a tough schedule. That's a lot for travel. Especially across the country. That's a tough schedule.
Tough schedule. Going to have to get things together early in the season.
Especially because later in that season, going to the Midwest, it may not be as friendly weather-wise. Playing outdoors at Wisconsin, that's a great environment, but you're in mid-November. Early November, you're at Michigan. Earlier in the season, you had 2 away games in a row. That's a lot of travel for the Ducks.
Ducks in the cold. That's what we want to see. That's when the Badgers will come out with no shirts on, and it'll be 15 degrees in a blizzard.
And they'll have nothing to lose at that point. They'll be looking for an upset, right? So
yeah, exactly. So very excited to see what this team can do, because it's always got something going on. Athletic, We know that Phil Knight pumps the money into there from Nike. And of course, it's made the social media rounds that he wants to win a championship in his lifetime there at Oregon. And we'll see what they can do. We'll see what they can do. Again, offense looks loaded with a number of different pieces. Can the defense step up and make some stops? Again, I think this was still a very good team last year. They just happened to come up on the wrong side of 2 coin flips against Washington. I still think this was a team capable of winning a national championship this year, just like Georgia, who didn't even make the playoffs. Just happened to lose the SEC championship game against Alabama. There were still 6 capable teams, I think, last year of winning the national championship, although Michigan, I think, very much proved that they were a half step ahead of the other 5. So after that, those are our top 7. The next 5 spots, we're probably going to have some deviation, I would assume. So do you want to tackle your 8, 9, 10, 11, 12?
Yeah, I think it gets a little bit harder. Let me see here. Man, is it bad that I really want to put Missouri at 8? Is that bad? That's too high, right?
Do it. They have one of the best quarterback wide receiver combinations in the country with Brady Cook and is it Franklin still?
And that, that has proven when you saw those great Clemson teams, it was a quarterback just throwing it to spots and receivers just coming down with the ball, right? You just couldn't stop them. And in college, that's just what it is when you have that kind of matchup. So I feel like I'm jinxing him a little bit by putting him here at 8. But I do. I think they're going to be very, very good. And I don't know that they'll win a playoff game, but I think they'll make it there.
Yeah. Sorry, Luther Burden III. Franklin's gone. 1,200 yards last year, 86 grabs, over 14 yards per reception, 9 touchdowns. Missouri, I still believe, really had a chance against Georgia there in that game. Things just didn't quite pan out at the end there. A late pick and then a subsequent touchdown by Georgia really put it out of reach. They were in a shootout with LSU until they just ran out of horses at the end, and I think the final score was a little lopsided. They were right in the thick of it there. Just a couple of beasts short against 2 top squads. But Missouri, again, the defense will look very good again this season. And again, to play in these top games, you need a top quarterback. And I think they have one of them here. Offensive line should be pretty good. Again, I believe another good group here. And I just, I consider them in the rankings as well. 29th in offense last year. Hang on, what do I got here? 11-2 last season. We're showing 9 offensive starters. That was 28th in offense last year. 5 on defense. That was 33rd last year. Again, that's some of those numbers got blown out in certain games. Still a very good squad. No Alabama, Georgia, Ole Miss, Texas, or Tennessee on the schedule. That's crazy.
No, they do play at Alabama.
Oh, they do. I must have missed that on the schedule. There we go.
Yep, they play at Alabama, but that is easily their toughest game. So their schedule lines up pretty nice. They're at Texas A&M, at Alabama, and then they have at South Carolina and at Mississippi State, but they get Oklahoma at home. Their non-conference is Vanderbilt, Boston College, Buffalo, and Murray State. So it's favorable, right? You obviously got to beat Alabama or have a close loss and win your other games, but you're in then after that, I think. So,
yeah, even with the secondary struggling, they play maybe a couple good quarterbacks that are going to threaten, theoretically, that secondary. So,
well, it's not even that so much, right? It's it's also just having the matchup to have somebody stop the quarterback wide receiver combo, which a lot of schools just don't have that lockdown corner. And so even if you don't do anything for most of the game, right, you break a couple plays, I mean, that can be the game.
Yeah. Well, and I'd mentioned this earlier to you specifically. But to bring it on the pod here, the SEC may have the best group of quarterbacks. And of course, getting rid of one conference and dispersing that talent certainly changes the ratios. But 2 years ago, I felt like the ACC had a really good mix of quarterback talent. Last year was the Pac-12 by far. But this year, the SEC, Carson back at Georgia, Jackson Dart at Ole Miss, even though he's used more in kind of that option running stuff. Jalen Milroe at Alabama, even though, again, sometimes his passing's questionable, but a great running quarterback and a great deep ball thrower. Tennessee's got a big prospect, Nico, not going to try his last name. Texas has got Quinn Ewers. A&M's got Connor Wingman, who only played 4 games last year and looks really good. Brady Cook, of course, at Missouri. Florida's got Graham Mertz, who looked a lot better last season. LSU's got Garrett Nussmeier, who's been on the bench behind a couple of great quarterbacks there at LSU. And Oklahoma's got Jackson Arnold stepping up. And even towards the bottom portion of that conference, almost everyone looks like they have a little bit potential. So SEC looks like it's loaded at quarterback this season. Next up, let's see. So you had Missouri there. I did not have Missouri there. I did put Texas A&M there. And that is very bold of me. Texas A&M was pushed towards the bottom of the pile, I think, for a lot of folks from what I am seeing. You know, again, Alabama's still in the mix. LSU. We've already got Georgia and Texas on the board. Ole Miss is in there. I like Delco, former defensive coordinator at Texas A&M, coming back. Did a lot at Duke. 18 starters back at Texas A&M. They still have talent there from the classes that Jimbo assembled there. Again, a lot of the roadblocks seem to come from him and his coaching, and he played some of the slowest paces, slow game pace that didn't help anyone out, and just a lot of problems stemming from him. So you've got a new guy in, focuses on defense. It seems to be where a lot of the talent is. The offense has been really banged up the past couple of years. It really has. Offensive line, quarterback problems, all kinds of things. This is going back like 2 or 3 years. So if Connor Wingman, who's back now after playing only 4 games last season, and is able to play, start every game this year, I think it's the first time in a while that's happened for a Texas A&M quarterback. And he could be really good. He has high, I don't know if he's a 4 or 5 star. He was ranked as one of the top quarterbacks in the country in the first month last season. They were 4-4 in SEC play, despite averaging almost 75 more yards than the opponent in conference play. Schedule has no Alabama, no Georgia, no Oklahoma, no Ole Miss, no Tennessee. Defensive line should be strong again, even though there's been some transfers out. They brought some transfers in. Secondary may have some questions again, but it might be secondary questions on a few of these teams. And again, quarterbacks might be king in this conference and trying to stop them. Big pass rushes, big defensive lines. Number 2 transfer portal class. A lot of guys brought in to bolster the secondary. 4 top 8 recruiting classes in the final years for Jimbo, and that's really only because one of them was ranked number 8. He had the number 1 recruiting class of all time in 2022, and then I think they were like a number 2 class, number 4 class, and like another number 2 class. Just big rankings. Offensive line was not great last year and banged up. And again, a lot of this had impact on the skill position guys, so they'll kind of have to sort through a couple of those pieces. But it just sets up for a surprise team because they still have talent. They have a proven coach. And they were still beating teams last year, just not on the scoreboard. It's just ridiculous how they were even worse than the national news that they were really getting by any metric. Now, the schedule, toughness, and sometimes it's tied to certain metrics. So some folks would be like, oh, Texas A&M has a tough schedule this year. I'm like, I sure as hell don't see that.
No.
They do open up at home against Notre Dame. Then they play home against McNeese State. They play at Florida. They're home against Bowling Green. Neutral site against Arkansas. They're home against Missouri. At Mississippi State, home against LSU. At South Carolina, home against New Mexico State. At Auburn, and home against Texas. That's 4 true road games. None of them had a winning record last year. They get Notre Dame, Missouri, LSU, and Texas at home.
Yeah, I guess it really comes down to if you think that the gap between Texas A&M and Texas or Notre Dame is that great. And I don't think it is. Like, I think that home field advantage kind of makes up for that, right? And so those games are winnable, you know?
I'm just saying 10-2, get me in the playoffs, man. Right now, that's what I'm saying. I think this team can do some damage. I'm excited to watch them. I like to see them stay healthy. I'd like to see if something is off in the Notre Dame game, let's see some evolution throughout the season, you know? And they got challenges there. I mean, Notre Dame will be tough. And then they play at Florida 2 weeks later. So a lot of doubt on this because of how loaded the top portion is. And no one has them ranked that high, you know, but I've got them above Alabama right now. So I've got them as my number. I have to rearrange these, but I think my number 7 is what we're on.
Yeah, and I think, it's interesting because I take the schedules into a lot of a big factor here. So I think we're actually on 9 here. My number 9 team is actually Penn State, and it's not really because I think, obviously they're one of the teams that's going to benefit the most from the expanded playoff format and kind of the retooling of the Big Ten conference, just because they couldn't beat Ohio State and Michigan, so they're automatically, we're never going to make it in. And so their schedule, they have Ohio State at home, and they play at USC. They don't play another ranked team on their schedule as it stands right now, preseason. They're avoiding Oregon and Washington and Michigan. So that sets up great for them. Even if they lose to Ohio's number 2, could be number 1 at that point, Ohio State, right? They're going to get into the playoff this year. So I don't really see them, they'd have to really mess up to not make it into the playoff this year, in my opinion.
My number 9 team is Penn State as well.
There you go.
Again, schedule, not super difficult. Drew Aller was good when he wasn't playing U of M or Ohio State. 25-2
I was going to say
reception ratio. Yeah.
I was going to say good, except for when he needed to be great.
Yeah. So it's and good, with like you said, with the schedule, will get you in the playoffs.
It will this year. Yes, it will.
25 touchdowns, 2 picks. He's a big 6'5" dude. He just needs to play a little better. The elite running back duo of Nick Singleton and Kytron Allen are back. Julian Flemington, who was like the number 3, was he the slot guy? Number 3 receiver from Ohio State last year, will probably be the top guy from Penn State this season, which is fine. They're going to run the ball. They're going to play a little bit different than Ohio State does. And the defense is so stacked.
The problem is you still have to keep in mind who their head coach is, and that's James Franklin, who just is not a game time coach. He can recruit, but I don't know that you even want him on the sidelines during the game. Like, he's just not. He does not make the good decisions, and you've seen that in the Ohio State games over the past several years, and that's got to be heartbreaking for Penn State fans. So,
yeah. Well, again, they finished 3rd in the Big Ten over and over and over again. This is, again, our 3rd team after Ohio State and Oregon in the Big Ten. So that is fitting. So number 10, I put Alabama number 10.
That's nice. I put Notre Dame.
Did you? Okay. So, I ended up sliding them right out of the playoffs. I had a hard time with that. So Alabama, do you have Alabama at all?
I have Alabama at 11.
Okay, so you did tuck them in there. let me see here. Alabama. We have a lot of hype around this team. But if we remember going into last season, we're like, quarterback seems to be a problem. Offensive line seems to be a problem. Secondary seems to be a problem. You know what? Wide receiver seems to be a problem. Do we have a tight end?
But in fairness, if their center could have snapped the ball a few times, to the quarterback, they would have probably won. They could have won everything.
But the point is, it was steadied. They developed throughout the season. It was under Nick Saban. I'm not saying that this staff is going to be bad or average. This could be an elite staff, but they could be the second.
Nick Saban. Yeah.
No.
Yeah.
Second recruiting class, 4th in the portal rankings, 8 starters back. Entire QB room is back, whatever that means. So Jalen Milton is still the number 1. Offensive line is a little bit younger. Maybe be the strength. They changed some things up, right? Center straight up got his ass out of town. Wide receivers have some. Yeah. Wide receivers have some experience, but Isaiah Bond again transferred out, went to, what do we say? Or he's out. He's gone. That's the point. Secondary, we'll see some freshmen in there. That's never been a problem for major programs in the past, bringing guys in, maybe for the first couple games. Big names in there. Xavier Mincy, Jalen Mbabwe. Said that wrong. Zeke and Brown. Schedule's workable, at least for an Alabama team. Home against Western Kentucky, home against South Florida, at Wisconsin. Now, if you're a middle of the line SEC team, those are some okay teams. You could go on 3. Those are.
It's too bad that Wisconsin game is a noon game Eastern time. If that was a night game, that'd be a different thing.
Yeah, definitely. Georgia at home.
After a bye, which is nice for them.
Yup. At Vandy, home against South Carolina, at Tennessee, home against Missouri, at LSU. That is a tough. Do they have a bye week in between Missouri and LSU? That's a tough stretch in there. Mercer is their late game, take a break. At Oklahoma and home against Auburn. They could win 11 games. They could win. They could go undefeated, but they could lose a couple games. Wisconsin, Tennessee, Oklahoma, LSU on the road. LSU won't play defense again. Georgia at home. Auburn at home. Remember the ending to that game last year. My God. And Missouri
should have lost that game. Yeah, and they rank Tennessee every year in the top whatever, and I'll believe it when I see it.
Yeah.
I don't know what Tennessee is. I don't know that they'll be ranked by the time they play in mid-October. So, It's not a horrible schedule, especially home games. They do have a tough stretch when you get into October into early November for sure. But I would say it's a harder schedule than they usually have, slightly. So
that's for sure.
And that's what you want to see. You want to see Alabama actually play some people, and you want to see them go on the road and play Wisconsin, even if Wisconsin isn't a ranked team right now.
Yeah.
So I see them. They could drop that Georgia game at home, or they could drop one later in the season, or depending on how close those games are. But I still think they're going to make the playoffs.
So they're my 10, you're 11. So what is your 10?
My 10 was Notre Dame.
Right. The Irish.
And that's a lot of, again, based on kind of schedule, it's pretty favorable, and obviously they get to make their own schedule because they're not in a conference, and it's just not, other than opening the season with Texas A&M, which is great, and is that a neutral site, or is that at Notre Dame? No, that's...
Yeah, they have a weird stretch in the middle of the season of neutral site games that I don't completely understand, but they bookend the season at Texas A&M, and then they finish the season at USC.
At USC, yeah, okay. So that's an away game. So that'll be obviously a really difficult game. But, if they are who they're supposed to be, they should get out of that with one loss, and I think that will be good enough to get into the playoffs if that one loss is to maybe a close game against Florida State, or maybe they lose the opener at Texas A&M and they just sweep the rest of the schedule. I could see that.
Yeah. I haven't double-checked the strength of schedule for them, but it's not going to be great. So 3 true road games, right? Because Purdue is in there in week 3.
Yep.
Other than that, Northern Illinois, Miami of Ohio, Louisville, Stanford at home. Neutral site against Georgia Tech and Navy. Not sure what's going on there, to be honest with you. We'll figure it out when we get to that point in the season. Home against Florida State. Home against Virginia, and neutral site game against Army. So, yeah, again, 10-2 certainly on the table. Briley Leonard, I like that he can run the ball. I'm not sure that he's an extravagant thrower, but he's going to be one of the better quarterbacks they've had in quite a while there, I think, in Notre Dame. Defense should be good. They'll be able to run the ball. It sucks that Charles Jagusha, I'm glad that no one listens to this for my pronunciations, but their giant left tackle is out for the year, and that's going to get tested immediately against Texas A&M's front. I think I have 15 starters back, and again, some good talent from the transfer portal, and a workable schedule. So certainly understandable. And that's again, they're not going to slot any higher than 6th, but certainly, again, I had them in my original arrangement, and I just dropped them out at the last second. So I certainly understand that. I expect them to be right in the hunt. I think I have them 13th at the moment. My last 2 are Michigan and Florida State. And again, I found kind of the cut line here a little difficult. Like I said, Notre Dame, I dropped to 13th. What are your last couple here?
Yeah, so my 11 was Alabama, and my 12th is Michigan.
Okay. Alabama and Michigan. So, of course, Michigan's going to be a question mark on the offensive side. We talked about Florida State a little bit already. DJ DJU's in there. Changes all over the place. Defensive front should be a strength. We'll see about the back end of the defense.
And that's interesting, right? Because I think that Florida State and Michigan actually aren't all that different from what they bring back from last year, right? Which is a very strong defense, maybe a questionable quarterback we haven't seen. Michigan's quarterback throw for more than one pass, I think. But we'll probably have fairly strong running identities and really locked down defenses. So it's a matter of what they can accomplish in their conference as far as their schedule goes, and then what kind of offense they'll have with their new quarterbacks. Yeah,
Michigan got a lot of guys in rotation last year. So those 4 starters back, tons of experience, upper class heavy, offensive line senior heavy, big dudes. Donovan Edwards back running back. Wide receiver wasn't a big emphasis last year, and again this year they'll be kind of sorting those pieces out. 8 home games. This is another one of those heavily favored. 5 home conference games, 4 away, and the non-con. So they open up against Fresno State. Shouldn't be the easiest, you wouldn't think, but it's probably one that they'll end up winning by 4 touchdowns, right? Texas on a neutral site. Yeah. Texas on a neutral site. Arkansas State, USC, who'll be flying across the country, and Minnesota at home. At Washington and at Illinois. They do have a bye week in between.
Texas
those.
is not neutral. Texas is at Michigan Stadium.
Is it really?
It is.
Oh, yes. It is. Okay. Then they have October 26th. They'll play the rivalry against Michigan State at home. They get Oregon at home. At Indiana, home against Northwestern. At Ohio State. So again, the road games at Washington, at Illinois, at Indiana, at Ohio State.
It's a mix of a schedule, I think. Obviously opening week 2 with Texas at home, you'll get a really good barometer of probably what both those teams are, or maybe you won't learn anything. It depends on how many mistakes there are, right? But
right.
you know, getting to play Oregon at home should also be a great game, and then obviously going to Ohio State. So playing some really good teams, and there's a good mix of getting them at home and then having to go win some away. So, and not that, going to Washington, we don't know what Washington's going to be, but at Washington and then at Illinois, and then coming back to face your rival after that at home, there's some tough stretches in there. And that's to say, we also don't know what USC is going to be, but playing that game at home. So, I think it's kind of a fun schedule. And I think they could, I think they're going to beat Ohio State and Oregon? No, they'll lose one of those games, if not both. But, if they beat Texas and everybody else, I think that still gives them a good chance as anybody to, be that team that has 2 losses and sneaks in.
Yep. Yeah, 9-3 seems like the floor, even not knowing for sure. I mean, the offense is going to run the ball, we know that, but with a lot of questions on who's going to be doing what and what role. Even quarterback, right? We're not sure that Orgy is going to be the for sure starting quarterback. He probably will be, right? But
I don't know. We haven't seen him throw the ball.
True. But 9-3 looks like the floor, unless things really go sideways. So, again, I have Ohio State, Georgia, Texas. Nope. I have Ohio State, Georgia. I mean, how I have them ranked and how they're going to look for the playoffs, right? Ohio State, Georgia, Utah, Miami, Liberty, Texas, Oregon, Texas A&M, Penn State, Alabama, Michigan, Florida State. And you had Georgia, Ohio State,
Florida State, Utah,
Liberty,
Oregon, Texas just flipped. I got Missouri in there, showing Missouri some love. Penn State, Notre Dame, Alabama, and Michigan.
Sweet. All right. Maybe we'll revisit. I had a few other things I want to tackle with you. Perhaps we'll do them another time since we're running over an hour and a half at this particular moment. But I think that was a fun exercise.
Yeah. We'll have to week 1 is very soon.
Week 0. Mm-hmm. All right. Well, thank you very much, Elliot, for your top 12 or your playoff teams. Not necessarily the top 12, but certainly your playoff teams. And we'll have to see here. Oh, real quick. Mm-hmm. The top 25 then. We rounded out with, after that top 10 initially there, I wanted to ask you. So we had Missouri at 11, which makes sense according to what we had. Utah 12. LSU was 13th. I think it's a little high for them, but I mean, they went 9-3 last year, not really playing any defense.
I was going to say, I think they're probably getting that SEC bump up there,
Yeah, I had a Heisman winner last year, so I mean, that's.
Yeah, what was I say about this year though?
I don't know. I put a little future on their quarterback there at long odds, so we'll see. Clemson at 14. I've heard some folks complain that that's maybe too low, but geez, I don't. Tennessee at 15. It just seems wild to me. So that's effectively the 4, 5, 6, 7th SEC team in the top 15.
Who is their quarterback? Is it Joe Milton?
It's the new kid, the new 5-star they have on there. He's got a weird last name. Let me grab it. Is he a freshman? Is he a true freshman?
Is this Merklinger or Lamalevea?
That's the one.
Lavia?
Mm-hmm.
Yeah, I don't know. 6'6", 215. Holy crap.
Yeah, Nico Lamelavia. Yep. That's the kid. So I don't know. They'll have receivers again. I think some questions on defense. The D line, yeah, they could be really. Yeah, so I think he's a true freshman. 11 starters back. Receivers could be really good. Trenches could be good on both sides of the ball. Secondary could be bad. Schedules looks a little tough. So that just seems a little high. But again, I tend to look at preseason as how I expect the season to end. I'm not sure that everyone looks at it that way.
Sure, yeah.
Because then Oklahoma's SEC as well. So now we're talking.
Yeah, I don't know. I don't know what they are now either. I don't know how they translate to the SEC. They don't play defense either.
Their secondary should be good this year. Supposedly. We'll see. That'd be a rarity.
Yeah.
Oklahoma State in there at 17. Kansas State at 18. A couple more Big 12 teams in the mix. Only the second and third on the list, though, at this point after Utah. Miami in there at 19. Texas A&M, another SEC team there at 20. But that, puts them much further back in the pecking order. Arizona at 21. I started going through some Arizona stuff, and I'm like, oh, there seems to be a lot more questions about this roster than I realized.
We have no idea what they're going to be.
Another great quarterback, wide receiver combination, but a lot of questions there.
No idea what either line is going to look like, who's he throwing the ball to, Really, other than that, we'll see.
Kansas, I am so excited for. So pissed that Jalen Daniels did not play more than a couple of games last year. He is so much fun to watch. I didn't even realize that Devin Neal, yes, the running back was back this year. I am so excited to see this team play again. They could be a dark horse for the conference championship. So excited to see Kansas back in the mix. 22nd, sure. 23rd, USC. Okay, quarterback looked good, throwing 5 touchdowns last year in their bowl game. We'll see about that. Again, defense, who knows? Don't know a lot of things. NC State talked about defense. Iowa talked about defense. I mean, if their offense moved up like 10 paces, it might be better. Schedule's not difficult either. So
just need a couple first downs.
Yep. And then Louisville, that Virginia Tech team, Boise State, SMU, Iowa State, Liberty all receive votes. Nothing too shocking here. UTSA down a little further. So
I will say honorable mention, Nebraska, that they beat Colorado. They could be undefeated when they go to play Ohio State at the end of October.
Yes, they could. That'll be very fun. So we will probably talk to you soon here. I like to get a few things together, maybe top 10. I've always called them top 10 TV teams, top 10 most exciting teams to watch when you put on TV. Then a list of just some channel flicking teams. Some you might flip on if they're doing fun stuff. Some you might flip off if they're getting blown the hell out. So maybe we'll pull you on for a shorter section next time as we get closer to week 0 here.
Sounds good.
All right. Thanks, Elliot. Talk to you later.
Thank you.
All my blessings, 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 all my blessings.
I need my blessings every penny. Daily counting every single one, I'm seeing plenty. Level up and watch that beat turn into a